Ciao, ciao. Welcome to the Linen Suit and Plastic Tie podcast. This is the podcast where we dissect and analyze the epic, the amazing, the cool, the impossible, the awesome, the not actually impossible power of storytelling and learn how to harness that power in our everyday lives. That word was lives, by the way, just in case you
hmm
missed it. I'm Gorav.
And I'm Kevin.
Kat, before you start, I know you could. I told you you run the intro, but I'm doing this really quick.
All right.
One thing I'm noticing. Well, one, I'm back in my LA apartment. Lots of stuff happening. Again, we're gonna get into it in a later episode. But one thing I'm noticing is because I've been moving around a lot, we've been doing the intros and the main episodes kind of disjointedly. So the best part of me is when I watch them back now that we're using YouTube, we're noticing stuff. Like you give me shit all the time because I'm a hand movement guy, so that comes on camera. Everything we're doing is coming on camera. But one thing that's really noticeable is how my beard changes depending on when we film. So like I haven't shaved since before we filmed this episode, but you'll see the beard looks different just in a little bit of time. But in our last episode, we had recorded the intro a couple weeks after the main episode, and it goes from long beard to clean shaven.
Yeah, I mean, we're literally going from no visual of anything to having to watch every little movement on it. And that is a really interesting point you brought up, actually, because another thing I noticed from the editing side of things is for both of us what we start to do when we're not talking. And when it's in audio, if you're not talking, you just don't show up in the episode. But when you have video, that's a little different because the camera is still on you. You're being recorded every single second. And for us who are not completely used to it right now, it's really interesting to start picking up like, moments of disengagement almost.
Yeah.
Um,
You probably laugh because I just did it. It's so weird because I am a fidgety person. It's one of the biggest reasons I take notes in classes I'm in at
mm.
school, not because I'm going to go read them later. God, no. Because like it keeps me engaged. That's why I take notes at work, right?
But that was the other thing, though, because we both got into the habit of taking notes as we were talking to our guests. But when it shows up on camera, it's the moment we stop talking, the moment we finish a question, we immediately look down on the camera, but the audience can't see what we're actually doing. So it just looks like we got immediately disengaged. So this is for the record that we are both actually taking notes and actively listening when you saw us disengage. But another thing that was really interesting, Gorav, is recently we got you exploring a new format of storytelling. You're starting to try this new video game that the two of us are playing together, called
Yeah.
Split Fiction.
So just a little context is Kevin's a pretty big gamer and
Mm.
I'm not. So I'm like exploring this with him almost like the first time, besides little games I played in the past and
Yeah.
Duolingo.
Yeah. Well, and we'll get into that probably in a later episode as well. But what's interesting from us playing this dual player video game together, though, is that for the same exact content, we get both the player and the non conventional player points of view. And something I noticed you doing, though, that was really interesting is the moment we get out of the like interactive playing segment of the game and gets into the cutscenes where there's just dialogues and kind of scripted play almost, you would actually drop the controller and start scrolling through your phone. I don't know if you
Really?
notice yourself doing that.
I really was trying. I really tried not to, and like
Uh,
I was worried that's where you were going, and I was
mhm.
like, no, he's not, because I thought I was being pretty good at not. There was moments I'm like, oh, we've been playing a while. I haven't like not haven't
Yeah.
checked my phone. I'm going into this justification mode. I just see myself being like, listen, let me prove to you why I use my like.
Yeah, yeah. But that is not the point I'm trying to raise here though. Is part of your experience understanding this new storytelling format is that in your brain, you probably recognize that the moment the interactive segment stops is the moment you need to you can stop engaging.
Mhm.
Whereas that is not the entire video gaming experience. the story actually is still continuing. In a good games, the interactive and the cutscene segments actually seamlessly flow in and out of each other. Where even if you stop pressing the button, doesn't mean you stop experiencing the story. Whereas for me, I'm more used to this format now. I know to stay engaged, but it's really interesting for me to watch you try to get used to this new format. And it's kind of a quirk almost from what you typically, the types of stories that you typically consume.
Yeah, when I watch a movie at home, I really try not to use my phone, but I struggle with it sometimes not to be fully engaged because, we're so used to having that ability, or my anxiety a lot of times pulls me to my phone to check things. But you're right, in the cutscenes, that's a moment where, you don't have to be engaged. You can pay attention, understand while doing other things. So it's saying like, okay, break, put down the controller, pick up my phone. And that's where you see, oh, this is why gaming's so interesting because they can combat the second screen problem.
Yeah. And to help us understand this unique storytelling medium better, this week we are talking to a storyteller who is so knowledged in this medium. Eric Monacelli is the expert storyteller for today's episode. If you know anything about video games, Eric's profile should be extremely fascinating to you because he started off working at 2K, working on some of the MLB games and their marketing. And then he went around some pretty well-known video game studios such as Naughty Dogs, which is where The Last of Us and Uncharted came from. Infinity Ward, he worked on Call of Duty, Capcom, and most recently, he is executive producer at Marvel Games. So if you've heard about the Spider-Man games on PlayStation, Black Panther, and the most recent hit game Marvel's Rivals, that all falls under the umbrella of Marvel games that Eric and his team help work on and market. So it's a fascinating conversation to understand all the ins and outs about designing and marketing video games, and an interesting career and life journey in itself. So let's get into it. Lin suit and plastic tie. Now here's Gorav and Kevin. So Eric, to start us off, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? What is your story?
Yeah, so man, this goes. My story is pretty long, but I grew up in a very small rural town called Sheridan, New York. So it was about, man, 2,000 people total. I had a father who was super, super into computers, entertainment, and Atari and all this stuff. And so that sort of piqued my curiosity and gave me this love and respect for just code, I guess, and video games. And then as I got older, I got really, really into music and arts and fashion and sports. And I think the intersection of all those really informed my love of entertainment and my love of proving that video games are an art form, which is the driving function of my entire career.
Amazing. We're very similar in the sense that we explore storytelling as an art form and understand the different formats and different variations. We've had a couple of video game people on the show. We've had a lot of comic book people because I'm a big comic book nerd. I have been my entire life. And they're just such interesting forms of storytelling. So I love people who understand that. But we also know that you weren't always planning on getting into video games, right? You went to Columbia. I think you were pre-med. I want to get this right. Primary Psychiatry on PMS for this
Yes, yes.
something disorder. Tell us about that.
Oh man, so I originally, rewinding it way back, music was the driving force of everything I did. I didn't go to college right away. I went to SUNY Fredonia, which actually is a pretty well-known SUNY school for music. And so I was going just for an English. I would like to write and that sort of thing. All the people told me I was a good writer. I was like, sure, whatever. That sort of thing. It really didn't interest me. But after my music career really didn't pan out, I really needed to branch out from the small town that I was in. And so, I transferred into NYU. I ended up getting an honors BA. When I graduated with my BA in literature, I was like, what am I going to do with my life? I could teach. My mom was a teacher. I loved teaching. Taught middle school for a year. I actually was working with the student who had a lot of developmental issues, and he piqued my curiosity in psychiatry. Then I applied to Columbia. The program I was in wasn't a good fit for who I was, and I dropped out of Columbia. But the one thing I did do to get into Columbia is a woman I was living with while I was teaching middle school, her husband was a professor, and he wrote on primary psychiatry about PMS dysphoric disorder. And I was a good writer at the time, so I made it pretty and I published it in this journal, and he gave me second author credit on it. And so that's how I got that published. I dropped out after a while, and then I was like, well, what am I going to do? And I was applying to places to work. But the woman I was interviewing with told me, hey, I hear you talking a lot about how you love video games. I don't think I'm going to hire you for this job.
Wow.
But I have this friend who's friends with like Hideo Kojima and is from Japan, and she runs this company called New York Tokyo. I think you should talk to her. And so that was my very first job in gaming. It was how I got started. It was a very happenstance, fortunate series of events, speaking loudly about my passions to the right person at the right time. And that's sort of where it all started.
We love a good pivot on the show, right? This is a big thing where we ask, what's your story? And a lot of people say, well, my story is more windy than most. Everyone will say this. And it's funny because there is no straight line, right? We love a good pivot because it's someone who said, you know what, this isn't working, even though I've been thinking about it for X years. I'm going to try something else.
Yeah, definitely not a straight line. Like there's nothing in life that's worth it that will ever be a straight A to B, right? I learned that the hard way. I probably made a little too many pivots, like music to teaching to psychiatry to video games. But, it got me where I am, and I'm fortunate for all the learning.
So I am curious about that too, because if a little bit of music, a little bit of psychiatry, a little bit of art, a little bit of literature, how did these elements help you forge your path?
They are the wrapper and the framework for how I think about the work I do in gaming. And ultimately, what I think about gaming is we're in the business of building virtual worlds. No matter what aspect you are in, if you're a designer, if you're a publisher, if you're a product manager, producer, artist, coder, you're basically living in this virtual world that's modeled oftentimes upon the real world. And I also think of games as these digital artifacts that are created. And when you're creating these digital artifacts, you got to be very thoughtful around what kind of curation you put into it, what kind of elements you put into the game in this little virtual world you're building. So while I was at NYU, I actually was a museum studies research assistant. So museology is a fancy word for it. And I noticed that there's this intersection between museum curation and how you want a player experience to work. For me, the best sort of player contentment for video games is this sort of very, very iterative wheel of like creating the perfect exhibit space for people to play in that can be viewed and revisited and makes them curious and interested. So that's one example. Literature, psychiatry, pretty straightforward. It's like play is a psychological state, and understanding how people like to play, you need to understand psychology. Fashion I look to a lot. That's for like character design. So I love it. I take all aspects of life, and it all fundamentally, I know that sounds very discursive, but it really gets back to the fact that we're making these virtual worlds based on the real world. And when you do that, you have to take all elements of the real world in and see what fits in this little virtual world that you're creating and curating as a digital artifact.
I really love this idea you brought up about, building the virtual world that is essential to what video games do. On that point, though, I think there are obviously a lot of different storytelling formats that kind of do the same effect, especially in a fictional sense, especially in what you do right now between Marvel games. You have all these IPs that are coming from other storytelling mediums. They originally started from comic books, and of course there's the cinematic universe, and those are fictional story worlds that have attracted a huge and loyal fan base over time. But with your understanding in the video game industry, though, How do you think storytelling in video game is unique compared to these other mediums in terms of building a virtual world and telling a compelling story?
Yeah, I mean, video games have always had the benefit of they fully immerse the player in a very active way. It's not passive participation. With movies, even books, you sort of sit back. You sit back, you're engaging in a very passive way. Video games are sort of a lean forward entertainment, right? It forces the player to engage, it forces the player to have their own sense of control and agency and trigger those reward centers and those responses that you want. It's a feedback thing. So like, personally for me, I play a lot of baseball games, as you probably noticed by the hat I'm wearing and the Jackie Robinson painting behind me and the Otani glove over there. I love baseball, and I wished I became a baseball player. That was my number one goal. I wanted to be a shortstop or a pitcher for the New York Mets. Did that happen? Absolutely not. But I think that's something video games can do. They have their sense of wish fulfillment. I might not be able to do this in the real world, but I can do it in this game and feel super strong or powerful or proud or mighty or even sad, different emotions. Like one of my favorite games of the past few years is Grease, and that game is exceptionally sad, but it just helps you processing loneliness and emotions. And so I think games have this power to do that no other medium has in a very, very active way.
Totally. I've played through both Spider-Man 2 myself on PS5, and absolutely, it just feels different when you actually get to control Peter Parker or Miles Morales swinging around New York City. I'd also love to know, how would you describe your current role as executive producer in video games? What exactly does an executive producer do in your capacity?
I had a longer title, which was Senior Director of Product and Franchise Development, which I think was a very good descriptor of what I do. I think of games as a product and also as franchises, and I try and develop them. That's very simplistic, but also I have this personal thing that video games are two things. They're a game and they're a product. The product is the thing you're selling and you want people to buy, the unique selling points, the consumer promise. And then the game is the craft and the artistry and the work that all the developers put into it. And part of my job, being an IP holder and working on a licensed game, is I work with both sides to make sure everybody's happy and all the things are working in concert. This is what the developers are going to care about from the art and craft side. This is what the publishers are going to care about from the business of selling the game. How do we make it sing so it resonates with an audience in a psychologically meaningful way? And that's kind of the middle I fill and what I've been doing at my job. So that's the highfalutin philosophical way of what I do. What I do day to day is I'm on a lot of emails. I read a lot of scripts. I play some builds. I talk to a lot of people. I'm a therapist for a lot of creatives, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's an interesting role because you're right. You're balancing a lot of things, and also the game industry is in a really interesting place in the media landscape because one, not enough people know how big the gaming industry is, and then two, well, a lot of the rest of the media is struggling with this second screen issue where people aren't engaging as much in like television, movies because they're on their phones. That's harder to do in the gaming industry, right? The whole point is to fully immerse someone. So I think it's such an interesting time to be working on like major IPs and in this industry where storytelling is really exploding. And you've worked on major IPs like The Last of Us, Capcom, Marvel, Call of Duty. How do you go about understanding these worlds as you do it? How do you go about understanding the different mediums?
I think every game I've approached in a different psychological aspect, and it all gets back to the matter of like, hey, what wish is this game fulfilling for the player? Some of them are very simple, like Call of Duty, you get to feel like a soldier. Cool. What does that mean? How do you sell that? How do you make it unique and new? If you take Spider-Man, for instance, it's like swinging through Marvel's New York. That is the fantasy. You want to swing, you want to shoot, you want to crawl, web zip, do all these things that make you feel like Spider-Man and make you feel like you are the protector and the friendly neighborhood hero of New York. And so digging into how would I feel as a player? What would be good? And sometimes there's some games that I'm like, okay, I don't play these kind of games, but let me understand how the players think and what they can do. A good example of that was I worked on this game called, when I was at Capcom, called Sengoku Basara, which was a Dynasty Warrior style anime game. Not really my thing, not something I love to play, but like understanding, cool, you want to feel like you're so powerful you can take on an army by yourself, right? Like getting into those mindsets and understanding that psychological promise is the key to helping people understand why they want to play them.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the most important tenets of storytelling we talk about in this show, that understanding your audience, taking the time to understand what are they trying to do. And I love this idea of wish fulfillment of like, okay, how can this game fulfill the wish that no other medium has been able to in the past, right? It's not about recreating something. It's about fulfilling that wish, that promise that the other media of a story is kind of already made. How do you fill that in your way?
Yeah, yeah. And like I said, it's the difference between the immersion and the active versus passive participation. But I also think movies are like an hour and a half to 3 hours max, three and a half if you're going too long. Television can be anywhere from a 10-minute YouTube video to a 30-minute sitcom to an hour-long drama. I think video games, because you're trying to give people this wish fulfillment that you hope will last infinite hours, honestly, like my biggest goal is I want everything I work on to become timeless. My ultimate goal working on the Marvel stuff is like some person who plays it in their 20s, when they have a kid, when they're 30 or 40 or 50, they're like, your Spider-Man's cool, but mine was the coolest. Let me show you, right? Like, and that's the Spider-Man that they go play. They take them back to Marvel Spider-Man and Marvel Spider-Man 2, or the Guardians of the Galaxy games, or any of our other games, right? So that's what I aim for. Just try and have some storytelling that's timeless and meaningful.
What are the key principles you follow then when you think about keeping players engaged and coming back to play your games and making your storytelling timeless? How do you approach that?
I think part of it is understanding the thematic overarching themes of the story, and then the foundational pillars of like, okay, mentorship, whatever it is, right? Marvel has its own brand pillars that like we always go back to, and like obviously one is being heroic, right? And so you need to go back. Relatability, right? Complexity, intensity. This moment's intense, but could we ratchet it up to 11? How do we get there and show really just a depth and of emotional weight and complexity to it? So making sure we have key things that we're always driving back to store. People call them different pillars, north stars, creative strategy, whatever keeps you coming back to that story and telling it in a engaging way. I think that's true of every game. You can dissect every video game and be like, what was this game really about? What were they trying to do?
Yeah, I love that. I think it's so important to have these guiding principles, to be able to approach it in this kind of larger than life way. And I love the design thinking elements. Can you tell us a little bit? Marvel has had a few years in video games, in movies, in comics, and TV. I'm a big Marvel guy. Tell us a little bit about what makes Marvel storytelling unique. What is kind of the Marvel way, Marvel method in the gaming industry?
Well, first off, thank you for being a fan and supporting us. It's always good. We love that. And I think for me personally, and how I approach it, I think Marvel it has these aspects to it. It's open, it's complex, it's relatable, it's heroic. These things, there's some levity and humor to it, right? Like things that are just like way back in the day, and when Jack Kirby and Stan Lee and all the folks were working on it, they always called it the world outside your window, and that holds true. I think what's been evolved nowadays is there's this fluidity to Marvel, that it sort of goes along and sort of understands cultural relevancy and trends and what's going on through people's minds, and sort of adapts things. And one of the stories that I like to tell, and people may not always think about this or realize this, if you think about where Steve Rogers came from, it was World War II. He was punching Hitler in the face. He was punching Nazis. Great, cool, right? Like that's Captain America. That's what you want. The Hulk, gamma radiation. There was a lot of concern when he was invented over the atom bomb. So if you look at the Punisher, probably one of the more clear examples, when he first came out, he was a vet from the Vietnam War. If you look at the Netflix series, he's a vet from the Iraqi War. So they sort of shift the timeline to sort of create this sort of cultural relevancy, and it keeps the brand fresh, it keeps the brand fluid, it keeps the brand relatable. And when you think about those two wars, when you think about the Vietnam War versus the Iraqi War, there's different kind of warfare and different sort of psychological outcomes of people who engaged in them. And so now the characters' personalities shift a little bit because of that. And so in the comics, you would see the Punisher written one way. And now in the Netflix show, you see him written another way because it is reflective of what their experience was. And so I think that sort of stuff and that sort of storytelling is critical and really, really gets into it. So like, I love character bios. I love history. I love seeing the lore. I love seeing what shaped this character for who they are, right? And you know, when we have conversations about what story treatment is going to be looking like, character bios are a big part of it. You know, the story treatment itself obviously is a big part, but you know, it starts with the pillars and the themes and it goes from there. But I think Marvel's exceptionally good at being fluid with their brand, where they don't get too rigid. They don't get too caught up in, hey, our characters have to be this certain way and behave this certain way. It's like, hey, does this work? Does this tell a good story? Let's mix it up. Let's change it up. And I think that keeps things fresh. And that's really the magic of Marvel.
Has there been any characters you've worked on that you learned something new about while creating, and how did that process kind of go?
Yeah, I mean, every character I work on, I learn something new. I think all the creative teams we work with, you know, especially the games that we have good success with, they bring a new, fresh take and spin on these characters, and I tend to learn something new about, you know, how I viewed the characters or how they interact with the world or what it means for them. It's an obvious one. You know, I didn't work directly on the game. Danny Ku's the executive producer on it, but Marvel Rivals has Jeff the Land Shark in it. I knew a little bit about Jeff. I like read some of them in the comics, but like just seeing how they made him so adorable, how they made him have such personality and just sort of be like everybody's favorite mascot in a game like Marvel Rivals is, really made me learn about like, okay, cool, this is what this character is capable of, right? Like, you know, you see it initially, you're like, okay, it's just a sidekick, but like, no, it could be a mascot. It actually could carry, you know, the flag for a whole game if you phrased it the right way. So you learn things like that. You know, I've worked on Spider-Man for about 10 years now. When I first got to Marvel, Spider-Man definitely wasn't even in my top 10 favorite superheroes, but working on the Insomniac version of Spider-Man, definitely one of my favorite superheroes, right? Insomniac was able to make a very unique take on the hero that I find highly relatable. You know, for me growing up, when I saw Spider-Man comics, it was like, oh, he's a teenager that somehow ends up with Mary Jane and is a genius, but always messes up. And I was like, okay, how could all these things happening? If you're super smart and you get the super pretty girl, like it just doesn't make sense in my head, right? And so when Insomniac aged him up a little bit, gave him some more 20-year-old problems, let's say, it just clicked for me. I was just like, I get it. I get this character. I understand why it's so relatable and universally loved and one of people's favorite superheroes of all time.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the most important parts about Spider-Man and kind of these Marvel heroes. Like Stan Lee wanted him to be a teenager with teenage problems to relate and build that empathy with their readers, right? So it's one of the most important things is that they have real problems, that they aren't invincible. They aren't these things that makes them larger than life. You kind of have to build back to core principles. What is that like when you're working and you're seeing the impact of your audience playing these games? You're seeing kids and they're learning lessons. How do you go about telling a great story, but also making sure the right lessons are imparted with your audience?
Yeah, I mean, you're always showing the human side of the superhuman, right? That's what we talk about quite a bit too. And that human side is honestly what makes these heroes so memorable and relatable and noteworthy. And, you know, beyond the fluidity that Marvel has in terms of like how it treats its characters, it is that human element that really makes its superheroes connect with people, I think. And we say often when Spider-Man succeeds, Peter Parker fails. When Peter Parker succeeds, Spider-Man fails, right? Like there's that dichotomy and that tension all the time. And, you know, we all feel that in our personal and professional lives, right? Like you could have a really big win at work, but then you get home and get yelled at by your partner and you're like, oh no, right? So it's like, or vice versa, right? So, you know, I think that's the thing that really, really makes Marvel heroes different from a lot of the superheroes out there and makes them unique. One of my favorite superhero comics of all time was the Matt Fraction, David Aja, Annie Wu run on Hawkeye. And that is the most human, street level version of a superhero ever. And he's just protecting his building in Brooklyn with Lucky the Pizza Dog. which I love Lucky, I love Hawkeye, I love Kate Bishop. And so I think that story is really what got me back into comics, honestly. When that came out, I was like, this is amazing. And so I think those sort of things really just resonate with me, and it connected with like some of my own personal experiences in life. I'm not like protecting a block in Brooklyn, but I lived in Brooklyn, and I did have sort of the same sort of like neighborhood vibes and that sense of like pride for my community. So
Yeah, love those insight. And a huge part of your career in this industry is dedicated to marketing, obviously the games and the studios. And you have worked across such a wide range of genre of games and different types of studios. So I'd love to understand from you, how do you think about the differences between these different audiences? Let's say Naughty Dog, where the studio itself has a pretty strong brand image. People have certain expectation, or Call of Duty from Infinity Ward. That's like a subset of this video game franchise IP that's very well known. Versus now, where you're in Marvel games, where I think people are obviously way more aware of the same IPs but in different mediums. How do you approach your marketing and understand your audience differently?
yeah, I mean, I think it's getting to the principles of what each studio is about. Believe it or not, one of the things at Naughty Dog for me when I worked there, 2011 through 2015, I thought Naughty Dog was underappreciated, and they kind of were, because they were just a video game studio at the time. The HBO show hadn't come out, the Uncharted movie hadn't come out. They were a video game studio in 2014 that had been around 30 years. And if you got in a Lyft or an Uber and told somebody that you worked at Naughty Dog, they immediately thought you worked for a dog food company or a porn company. They didn't think you worked for a video game company, right? And I think part of what my goal there was, and I had the idea to do the 30th anniversary celebration for Naughty Dog. I did a lot of work around that to just sort of lift the studio brand up, to get it more into the zeitgeist, especially after we had the critical success of Last of Us that we did on the game level. That's what you got to recognize, and that's what you need to do. A lot of my career has been seeing where the gaps and the holes are in an organization and what they're not doing, and what Naughty Dog had not done to that point was been really good at promoting their studio brand. But now they're great at it. With Infinity Ward, I did a similar thing. When I joined there, I wanted to sort of refactor their image a little bit. I wanted to modernize it, make it a little more sleek. I worked on a space game. So my brother worked at NASA, or does work at NASA. So I was like, yo, I want to work on a space thing. Maybe I get to work with my brother. I got to work with some of his colleagues, but not him. And so we got to do some cool stuff around that. And so, you all approach it from a different perspective and just kind of make the best of what you can for each studio and each place you're at, and think about what those brand missions are, what the brand values are, how they want to talk to people, and sort of get that out there.
And I'm curious, how does that work in kind of a bigger org like Disney as a whole and Marvel as a whole? How do you work with, how does the storytelling process work? How do you stay nimble? How do you kind of learn from different Disney games or different Marvel departments or different things going on? How do you go about approaching a bigger studio?
It's a lot of finding out who is passionate in an organization about what you're doing, right? Like, if you reach out to people, you're like, all right, do you love Marvel? Do you really love Marvel? Do you love video games? Okay, cool. Like, all right, like, what can we do together, right? And so you find that going on. You also, when you join a place, you want to make sure that they respect the medium, and I think Disney, as evidenced by what they're doing in video games now, has definitely learned, like, yo, video games are where it's at. When I first joined, they were kind of catching up. And now I think the work we did and the work Lucas did and a lot of other teams, Pixar, 20th Century Fox, all our Disney games, sort of have elevated gaming in the eyes of the org itself. And that was a big, big goal of mine when I joined Disney, because I was working at Call of Duty, I was working at Naughty Dog, I was working on some of the biggest games out there, and I didn't want to join another licensing team and just make licensed games, slap a logo on there. I wanted to make games that were going to be timeless and lasting, and also change the perspective of people on like what games could be. It always gets back to, for me, proving out games are their own art form, their own technical achievement, their own high level of craftsmanship, and creating this amazing digital artifact that people can see preserved in some form for hopefully, the rest of their life, and talk about it and experience it and go back to it when they need to feel something or escape from something or do whatever they need. So, like, I always try and look for the people that want to support that ultimate objective.
And Eric, we have learned so many great stories and insights from you today. And for our final closing question, we call it suspenders. This is where we ask you a fun, random thing that's unrelated, and you can give us any answer you feel like. The question of the day is, if you had to go back to school for something unrelated to your career, what would it be and why?
Unrelated to my career, it's hard to say because, as I said, I think everything can connect to video games in some way.
Mm.
But, my dad sold tractors, and I grew up around a lot of mechanics, and I was a mechanic for a little while when I was 18, but I didn't really respect it. I didn't get into it enough, right? Like the trade and the craftsmanship of it, because everybody where I grew up was that. They had a trade, they had a skill. And so now, I'm in a house now and doing stuff and living in a house and things like that. I was like, man, I wish I was more handy, right? So I'd probably go back to school to have some sort of trade skill or that sort of thing. Also getting better at music. I did study a little music, but I think learning a trade like, home repair, plumbing, something that really, really gets into the nitty gritty of it would be a nice skill to have.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This was amazing.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate your time.
Welcome to Top Hat. This is the part of the episode where we dissect and analyze some of the cool, epic, and amazing insights we got from this week's expert storyteller. And this week we had the amazing Eric Monacelli from Marvel Games. And Kev, it was the perfect marriage of some of our favorite things. Comic book fan, Marvel fan, plus your video game expertise and fandom. So it was great because we got to kind of combine these and talk to someone about such not only a powerful form of storytelling, but also one of the most fast-growing sectors of the industry.
Yeah, and he's so well versed in all those aspects too, because we obviously talked about video games and video game designs and storytelling, but he was also very well knowledge in, what makes Marvel storytelling works. So it's such a fascinating conversation with someone who really understands all facets of the storytelling that he works on.
And that's the thing about building your career is you're not just talking about your last thing, right? You're talking about the whole journey. So I love it when we talk to someone like Eric, where we love a pivot. He grew up in this rural town. He didn't grow up a huge gamer. He thought he was going to do one thing. Then he thought he was going to do another thing. Then he started doing cool things in medicine, right? And then he's like, you know what? Gaming. And every single one of those career choices, those pivots, those experiences, the fact that he was really into different forms of storytelling, like literature and music, every single thing fed into his career. Like if it wasn't for his love for music, if it wasn't for his medical career, he wouldn't have these tools in his toolkit that helped him be a unique gamer. Having outside perspective, outside experiences, being able to think about something differently is really what sets you apart in any industry. It reminds me a lot about our conversation with Andy Pearson when we asked him, well, what other marketers do you look at? Because there's other amazing marketing firms that are doing different things, like Duolingo, like Dr. Squatch. And he said, none of them. No offense to them, but I get my inspiration from SNL and music. So it's the reminder that not only is speed bumps and twists and turns parts of life, not only are they stuff to celebrate because it teaches you lessons, but it's stuff that makes you more unique, and it gives you the skills to approach a problem differently. It gives you the skills to say, even though I modeled my career after these 5 people, because I went through these unique things, I can build my own life. It's not about following a path. It's about forging one that's fully unique and honors your whole experience. And that's just storytelling. It's about telling you that I'm not trying to do someone else's story. I'm trying to build my own.
Yeah, and what's important is embracing the fact that your story is going to be non-linear and multifaceted, and being able to embrace the diversity of your own experience fully, that allows you to draw inspiration from all the little twists and turns. And one great example that Eric shared with us is how his love for art and studying museums, museology specifically, helped him understand game design. And he sees good game design as a successful curation of these digital artifacts. And that is in turn what motivates players to keep coming back to interact with the game, the story, the world. He takes so much inspiration from the diverse background that he came from, and that is what allows him to excel. And something else Eric talks about that was really interesting is there's this wish fulfillment aspect in every video game, because what's unique about gaming as a format is you are actively engaging, interacting in the world, in the story. You're playing the protagonist. So the story you experience in a video game is a story you created. So when it comes to marketing, what wish does this game fulfill for the players? And if you're able to effectively communicate that to your audience, that's how you're able to successfully market your game, your product to your fan base.
I loved when he talked about like the pillars of Marvel Entertainment, is we want to take you on a heroic journey. And then so the game's built around curating that heroic journey, but also the marketing's about be a hero. And also it reminds you about storytelling as a whole. Any type of storytelling, whether it's a pitch at work, whether you're trying to sell your company, you are trying to serve a wish, right? You are trying to tell a journey. You're trying to say, hey, ooh, I just kicked my desk. You're trying to say, hey, my app or this thing at work or this business is going to fulfill this wish, whether it's to get all these people to use this app and make you money. I'm trying to fulfill the wish of making you money by fulfilling our customers' wish of doing this. So I think it's a good storytelling tenet of like, okay, what wish are you trying to fulfill to your audience, and how are you going to get them there through your story?
Yeah. For someone who has played all three of the Spider-Man games on PlayStation, I can honestly say that video game franchise, next to Spider-Verse, has been my favorite way of experiencing the Spider-Man story. There's something irreplaceable about being actively engaging in the world, traversing through New York City, shooting webs as we control it. So it's such a pleasure to be able to talk to one of the minds that helped put these games together and deliver those into the world. This has been another great episode of the Linen Suit and Plastic Tie podcast. If you like our show, make sure to subscribe and follow us wherever you listen or watch. Leave us a comment and a review. Let us know how we can do better. And follow us on Instagram, TikTok at LSPTpod, LinkedIn, Linen Suit and Plastic Tie.
We appreciate you, although I recently found out Kevin cuts most of these. We appreciate you. Thank you for listening, and thank you for dedicating yourself to becoming a better storyteller, because we are a species of storytellers, and that's how we get better, and that's how society progresses. I'm Gorav.
And I'm Kevin, and that was concise, so I'll leave it in this time.
I feel like this episode was so many good bloopers for our eventual blooper reel, which now will be on video. Anyways, we'll see you next time.